Managing Partner of Lakshmikumaran and Sridharan.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rama Mathew, Pratik Jain, and Lakshmikumaran. We meet at a time when we are just about 6 months away before we complete the 7th anniversary of what was billed as independent India's biggest tax reform, if not the biggest reform, which is goods and services tax. It took a long time coming. It took probably more than a decade before actually in a grand midnight event on June 30, in the intervening night of June 30 and July 1, and in a grand midnight event in Parliament, we saw GST roll out. 6.5 is almost 7 years from now. Rama Mathew, do you think it's still a work in progress, or we are nearing perfection very soon?
Let me put it like this. There are two ways of looking at this. One is the glass half full, the other is the glass half empty. What we need to address is actually what was the objective of GST reform. And if you look at the big picture objective, that is integration of taxes, simplification of the logistics process, simplification of the implementation process, I think we have pretty much hit it. And now what we are looking at is what we really need to do next. And there we need to address the micro details, which will make our life easier. There we have challenges. We do know that we have certain challenges. We do know that we need to address certain very specific issues. And there, when we need to address those issues, primarily in the tax rate structure, because the initial transposition was of the service tax and the central excise rates into the GST format for easier compliance, frankly. And now we need to look at it from the big picture to make sure that the contradictions which have crept in, the gaps which have crept in are addressed. Some of the processes we need to address.
Absolutely. Mr. Lakshmikumaran, we are nearing the 7th anniversary of GST. It promised so much. Do you think it's glass half full, or do you think it's half empty, or probably more than empty?
I think, first of all, I must say that heralding GST in this country is another great event. I never thought in my life that the tax paid in Maharashtra will be given as a credit in Karnataka. I never imagined. It has happened. It needs celebration, no doubt at all. It has been a great effort, and the cooperative federalism is in full swing. While we all applaud the advent of the GST, we must also realize that the law that have been written, where the audience is the people here and many people outside, they can't understand this English.
Right.
And we need to put in a mechanism where a small and medium company wanting to be tax compliant, and how will he understand what he is supposed to do? Should he always run to Pratik, if not to me, or to anybody, to understand what this language is? You need to do something. And other countries also have this problem. The legal language always clouds in a manner. It's difficult to understand for common man, though it is English. We need to necessarily simplify, and the CBIC and the government should come out with simple understanding and a lot of FAQs, which they did in the beginning.
Right.
But only thing is, they don't want to own it up.
That's
when
right.
somebody wants to rely on it, they say, no, interpretation is separated, etc. It goes to them. That's where the problem is. But what we need is, as Rama has mentioned, that we need to now look whether the real estate should still be outside GST or not.
Right.
It's an important question, because if you bring it in here, what are the other implications which can come benefit to the economy? Right. That's one of the questions. I think I will answer the little later. Let us hear Pratik what he wants to say.
Right, Pratik. So is it still a work in progress? I mean, how satisfied are you, if you look back over the last 6.5 years, do you look back at it with a degree of satisfaction that it has promised a fair degree, it has fulfilled a fair degree of what it's promised? And also, on Lakshmikumaran's point, is it a communication problem too? Because I remember when GST first came out, and probably in a mistaken zeal to make it more understandable and comprehensible to the Hindi-speaking audience, the government said, "Isko bastu evang seva kar boliye," and nobody understood that. In fact, traders said that GST is far more easier to understand. What's your view?
Well, definitely, I think it is work in progress. There's no doubt about that. But a reform of this nature and scale is supposed to be work in progress for many, many years. I mean, if you look at Europe, they implemented GST maybe 3-4 decades back, but still work in progress, right? So what any tax reform of this nature, you have to see it from 3 perspectives to my mind: simplicity, certainty, and transparency. GST has brought in a lot of structural simplicity, right? Same law across the state, pricing is easy, supply chain is easier, movement of goods is easy, customer can see the invoice, and entire GST is there on the invoice. GST Council takes all the decisions, agenda items are there, people know how the decisions have been taken. It's not that any state can get up and say, I will increase the tax rate from 5% to 12%, right? Earlier, when we used to buy a mobile phone, we always used to see which state has a lower VAT rate, and so on. So therefore, structural simplicity is there, transparency is there. I think the element of certainty is perhaps missing. I would think that we need to look at 3 different buckets of reforms: structural reforms, legislative reforms, and most importantly, as Ms. Lakshmikumaran is saying, administrative reforms. Because the tax administration perhaps has not been given that much of importance as the compliance part of it. Still, you see center and state fighting with each other, different interpretations, advanced ruling not working, and so on. So we'll have to work towards it. But overall, if I look back 6.5 years, I think it's just as good as it could have been, maybe better than what perhaps we expected at the beginning. Absolutely.
Rama Mathew, Pratik raised a very relevant point on transparency and structural simplicity. But one of the biggest pain points of GST so far has been multiplicity of tax slabs and also the unpredictability. So GST was built to be something like a good and simple tax, but we have multiple tax slabs, and clearly it goes against the definitional idea of a single tax or at most a 2 tax slab regime. On the top of it, we have unpredictability and interpretation by tax authorities. Say, for instance, the pizza topping is a clear case. Last year, about 1.5 years ago, it was ruled that pizza toppings will attract a different GST. Pizzas had inside a pizza store would attract a different GST, and pizzas delivered at home or somewhere else would attract a different GST. It goes against the definitional idea of simplicity, doesn't it?
But you forgot to mention Malabar Paratha.
That's right, yes.
I was waiting for that and for your extruded products, namkeens. Well, one of the challenges we have had, as I said, is on multiplicity of slabs and what I would call rate rationalization. There was the GST Council had already recognized it and set up a rate rationalization committee. Unfortunately, the rate rationalized committee has actually not yet submitted its report. That is a massive exercise. The second problem we will actually find is also that because of lack of legal interpretation, statutory interpretation by the courts, because of the lack of the GST Council's functioning, a lot of interpretational issues are now coming back to the GST Council for policy decision, which should not actually happen. It should not, and the courts cannot be, the high courts and the jurisdiction cannot be the first court of appeal, which they are very clear about, that they are not the first court of appeal. They will provide temporary relief until such time as the GST tribunal starts working. and provides interpretational clarity. Once these two things happen, a lot of these, the problems which are being flagged right now can get addressed. Very honestly, I agree with Pratik. I did not expect personally, and I was a departmental officer till just a month ago. I did not expect it to stabilize so quickly. I expected it to be a lot more challenging. The first 2 years were challenging. Something which Pratik said, that about certainty. There are two ways of looking at it. One of the reasons we don't have certainty is because every time somebody flags a problem, the GST Council clarifies one way or the other. You do have a clarification, you do have a notification. That makes for a very responsive government, but it also makes for a very, very, shall we say, challenging implementation universe.
Absolutely. Now, Pratik, Mr. Lakshmikumaran, touched upon this in his initial remarks when he said that initially the GST Council and the GST Secretariat used to put out very frequent FAQs to clarify matters that probably seem to have stopped. Do you think that there is a lack of communication that has crept into the administrative aspect of GST, particularly on how policy decisions are being communicated for better clarity?
Look, I don't think that the communication has slowed down or things like that. I think the focus of the government has moved towards collections. Initially, the government had created different groups to say for different sectors, we will have committee of officers who will issue clarification and so on. Now that has taken a backseat. GST Council is meeting little less frequently now, as it was meeting earlier, and there are a lot of work to be done. What we have been requesting the government is that please set up sectoral committees, so to say, because the issues for e-commerce and let's say online gaming, which is getting a lot of sort of coverage these days, is completely different from the issues, let's say, of a power sector or a real estate. So the same officer, and if you see what happens in other developed economies, the tax officers also have a sectoral expertise. So that's where we need to get to. It's a process between all the stakeholders. It should continue. I don't think there's a lack of communication, but a lot more focus needs to be there on this now.
Mr. Lakshmikumaran, Pratik touched upon the issue of online gaming, and July 11 last year probably is a significant day for the online gaming industry because they were expecting something and something else turned out from the GST Council meeting where 28% tax was being imposed on full gaming value of online games. There were all kinds of reactions that is triggered, that it's going to kill the industry. 6 months down the line, how do you think the industry has actually adjusted to it?
Thank you. I think I must make a statement that I do represent almost a number of gaming companies in the Supreme Court and others. So therefore, what I make a statement, I must make it very clear that a disclaimer here. I would say that the gaming companies are not very much worried whether the rate of tax is 28 or 18 or something, etc. That I think they can live with it. The main problem is regarding the valuation. And pardon my say, I think with due respect to the powers that be, including the senior government counsels in the Supreme Court, the way the valuation is done for the past period, where the demands have been raised in astronomical numbers, is, according to me, is incorrect. Of course, the courts ultimately will decide. But the dispute ought not have reached there. People should sit down and then talk and exactly what they have done now.
Right.
The same thing should have been in the past.
Absolutely.
That's what I would say. One more question you mentioned about the multiple rates of taxes on the GST, which is creating its own problems. But I must say one thing, sir. If you look at the Indian economy, income tax can be charged at different slabs depending upon the income of the people. We can find out what the rate of income, and accordingly we can charge. But GST being indirect taxes, it falls on everybody at the same level.
Absolutely.
Therefore, any country cannot afford to have, especially a country like India, cannot afford to have the same rate of tax for rice and wheat and also motor cars and refrigerators. It just cannot happen.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, sir, for giving this insight, and the Honorable Minister is here. We'd like to wrap up this discussion, hoping that very soon we'll soon move into a simple two-tier GST structure. Thank you so much, Rama Mathew, Pratik Jain, and V Lakshmikumaran.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please stay back for a group photograph, please. Thank you, Gaurav, and all the panelists. That was a